Let's bring in Kayleigh McEnany. She is the White House press secretary there in D.C. Good morning to you, Kayleigh.
Good morning, Ainsley.
Good morning. So that made a lot of headlines yesterday. It was talked about on most or all of the channels yesterday. You know, usually it is something that you just keep between yourself and your doctor. We don't walk around talking about what drugs we're taking. Did the president just want to be transparent, or was it something he didn't think would be a big deal? Why did he decide to talk about it?
The president just wanted to be transparent about his personal health decision that he made in consultation with his doctor. And one of the things that I really want to get out there this morning that unfortunately there's a lot of misinformation about is, first let me emphasize strongly that any use of hydroxychloroquine has to be in consultation with your doctor. You have to have a prescription. That's the way it must be done. That being said, I talked to the FDA commissioner this morning, Stephen Hahn. He said hydroxychloroquine has been approved for 3 other uses. We have a lot of information about the safety of this drug, though ultimately you make that decision with your doctor. So some of the misreporting on other networks, these apoplectic analyses of hydroxychloroquine ignore the fact that tens of millions of people around the world have used this drug for other purposes, including some people in my communications office who used it for malaria prophylaxis before traveling to other parts of the world.
Right. Kayleigh, did the president start taking it 10 days ago because a couple of members of the White House staff had tested positive, and suddenly the coronavirus was inside the West Wing complex and he was just worried about that? Is that why he started, or had he been talking with his doctor about taking it for a while?
Yeah, so I don't have any information about the exact rationale. That was a personal deliberation with Dr. Conley and the president. But as has been noted, the president has said pretty widely that this is a drug that he had looked at with optimism. But nevertheless, he said that this is a decision that must be made with the doctor, as he's repeatedly said.
Kayleigh, I just want to move on and talk about opening up the country and these businesses and states. Dave Portnoy, who I know is a sports guy, but he's as tapped in with the younger demo as anyone in America. He said, in his opinion, if Trump was on the other side of the spectrum and being like, let's keep the country locked down, my guess is everybody would say, open it up. Do you believe that some people are keeping their states locked down because it would bolster an economy that reflects the president's record in an election year?
Look, that's something that, each governor, I certainly would hope not. I certainly would hope that they're not keeping their states closed for political reasons. But, some of the decisions that have been made throughout this haven't been data driven. I've mentioned some of those before, and you have to ask yourself why some state governors aren't following the data. All governors should, in fact, do that. But one thing I would note about reopening, Brian, we had a call with governors yesterday, and the president was there and the vice president was there. And one of the individuals we heard from on that call was Dr. McEnany, who's a renowned expert on mental health. And she noted the fact that about 120,000 people die per year because of suicide and drug overdose, and that those numbers can become exacerbated in an extended quarantine situation. So this isn't, as Dr. Azar said, or excuse me, Secretary Azar said, this is not health versus the economy. This is health versus health, because there are lives lost in a sustained quarantine too.
Right. And Kayleigh, since you brought up that phone call with the president and the governors yesterday, at one point he said he would be happy to have the federal government assist them with reopening, but he wasn't really specific. What does that mean? How would he help them? How would the federal government help the states?
So one of the things that we've done, and it's been so impressive to see, is each state has given us a plan for what they believe they need for testing purposes. And we have been able to sit down, meticulously go through those plans and say, we can assure you that you will have enough testing for phase 1 that we've supplied. And of course, states should take the lead on this, but the federal government has come in and a huge audible and helped the states. I mean, it's been impressive to watch that operation play out in real time.
Yeah, Kayleigh, people are, people are ready to get back to work. People are hurting. And Brian was interviewing someone recently, said, I'm jealous. Ohio's getting to open up. And he was interviewing the governor of Ohio. He said, getting ready to open up, and I'm jealous of that. And I think we all are. You used to live in New York. Things are different here. Every state is different. Many people are blaming China. Some of these states, some individuals want to sue China. The president said yesterday, he's threatening to keep the World Health Organization, that funding freeze in place for another 30 days. Is that a definite?
Yes, it is at the moment. The president's letter was very revealing. One of the most disturbing things that I think was in the letter the president wrote about the WHO was that on January 21st, you had the Chinese president Xi Jinping telling the WHO, pressuring the WHO to not call this a health emergency. And the very next day, you had the WHO saying this is not a public health emergency of international concern. That is one of many pieces of evidence we have of the WHO and China slow walking this information. Lives were put at risk, and U.S. taxpayer dollars will not go to an organization that slow walks information, has a China bias, and puts American lives at risk.
All right, so here's a quote from the letter. It is clear that the repeated missteps by you and your organization as the president to the WHO responding to the pandemic has been extremely costly for the world. The only way forward for the WHO is for it to actually demonstrate independence from China. If the World Health Organization does not commit to major substantive improvements within the next 30 days, I'll make my temporary freeze of United States funding to the World Health Organization permanent. So there's the message. It's unambiguous. So China yesterday, reportedly, President Xi was asked to be the keynote speaker. Why not? And in it, he gave in to international pressure, which included Russia and Turkey, to allow an investigation into Wuhan. Number one, do you believe it? And number two, is that the type of step forward that you're hoping for?
Look, I'll leave it to the president as to what steps he hopes to see. The onus is on the WHO here to prove that they don't have a China bias. That is where the onus lies. They need to assure the United States that taxpayer dollars are used well, particularly when you consider the fact that they were all for China's onerous restrictions of travel into their country. But when the president said, I'm stopping travel at our border from Wuhan, we were told by the WHO that that was a bad decision. So interesting facts like that really highlight the problems there. But I'll leave it to the president as to what changes he wants to see.
Kayleigh, when you look at the numbers, the contributing countries from 2018 to 2019, we gave almost $900 million, the United States. China gave $90 million, not even close to what we gave. Why is the WHO so supportive of China and not us when we bankroll them?
That is the million-dollar question. And what do we get for that $400 million odd we give and China giving a fraction of that? We get the fact that they hide information given to them from Taiwanese officials that this virus had human-to-human transmission. That information was hidden. The information about this potentially having asymptomatic spread, that also was information not given to us. What have we gotten in return for our money? We finally have a president who says that's enough of funding these global organizations where we get very little in return.
Right. Kayleigh, let's switch gears. Down the street from where you are, Department of Justice Bill Barr was there yesterday and was taking an overview of what has happened to the president, starting with the campaign and looking at the history of that and said, you know what happened to him? Not normal. Here's the AG.
What happened to the president in the 2016 election and throughout the first 2 years of his administration was abhorrent. It was a grave injustice, and it was unprecedented in American history. We saw two different standards of justice emerge, one that applied to President Trump and his associates, and the other that applied to everybody else. We can't allow this ever to happen again.
And I'm sure you would agree with that. One of the other things he said was that and apparently he talks to John Durham, who's doing this investigation, talks to him every day. He says from what he has seen, he does not expect Vice President Biden or President Obama to be involved in any sort of criminal investigation going forward. And then the president said after that, he said, well, I'm kind of surprised. What's the president surprised about?
Well, the president's surprised that there are a lot of questions that still need to be answered by President Obama, by Vice President Biden, namely the fact that the Department of Justice learned about the Michael Flynn conversation and the unmasking in the Oval Office from President Obama. I mean, that's remarkable. Think about that. You had Sally Yates saying, wow, I had no idea about this until President Obama informed me about this conversation. You had a half a dozen partisan officials unmasking Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. And, Steve, I have to ask ask you, if the tables were turned, if an RNC-funded dossier was used to spy on members of Vice President Biden's current campaign, what would happen? What would happen if Trump administration officials like Mark Meadows and Vice President Pence were unmasking people like John Kerry? Heads would explode, and rightfully so. But that's what happened under the Obama administration. But if the tables were turned, you'd have the media caring a whole lot more.
Right.
You're right.
Kayleigh, yesterday the President of the United States said Mike Pompeo asked him to fire the Inspector General, so he did. What reasons did Mike Pompeo give to the President to fire the Inspector General at the State Department? Because Senator Grassley, a Republican, wants to know that answer. Do you know it?
Well, the president said yesterday that he told various departments who have Obama IG officials that it's their decision whether to let that individual go. Secretary Pompeo made that recommendation, and the president agreed with it. And I would just note that when President Obama did the very same thing, when he fired IGs, when several IGs came together and wrote a letter saying, President Obama, you're inhibiting our investigations, no one seemed to care then. But all of a sudden, when President Trump does what's in his lawful authority, people are very upset about it.
Kayleigh, thanks for joining us.
But you don't know.
Thank you.